Hey everyone, good morning. How are you? Super. All right, that's good. It's so good to be with you. It's so good to see you. It's so good. Some of you I know, some of you I hope to get to know. All right, but it's fun to be here with you all. Let me tell you something. I was thinking about what to do here because usually, you're a pastor, you come up front, you preach, right? That's what you want to do. But I don't want to preach at you guys. What I want to do is the purest form of being a Christian, which is sharing your story, right? Being a witness. You know why? Because there's power in the story. But let me tell you something else. Let me maybe rephrase that. The power isn't in the story itself. The power is in the significance behind the story. It's in the meaning behind the story, right? And so in telling your story, you sometimes you're tempted of talking too much about yourself. And the point isn't to talk about myself. I want to tell you guys a little bit about what Jesus has done in my life, Jesus personally. All right, and again, that's why I don't want to preach at you guys. I just want to share a little bit of my story with you and tell you how I got here. As Pastor Daniel already mentioned, I'm a PK. I'm a preacher's kid. I'm a pastor's kid. In fact, my dad is right here today. He's visiting me, him, my mom, my dad, my little brother. They're here visiting, and so there's a lot of this story that has to do with them. But growing up as a PK, I was hearing KD's, right, Dr. KD's testimony yesterday, and there's a lot of it that I could relate to because I'm a preacher's kid, right? But here's the thing. She's a lot nicer than I was. I think that she was a lot more faithful than I was. As a PK, sometimes you grow up in the shadow of your parents a lot because everyone knows your dad, right? You're the pastor's son, and not only that, but you have to be a good example. Are there any PKs here today? Anyone? Maybe not only PKs, but children of parents that work in ministry. Do we have any of those here? All right, we have a few. All right. How many of you here today were born as Adventists? Trick question. You'll see why. All right, but it's good to know, okay? So that was me growing up. And I'll tell you, for the first few years of my life, I was a pretty typical Adventist kid, preacher's kid. My dad, usually Adventist pastors move around a lot. So I was born in D.C. My parents are from Brazil. They were here studying at Andrews, and my dad was finishing his doctoral program. He was studying, my dad has a PhD in systematic theology. What does that mean? No one knows. Right? I don't know what that means to this day really well, what systematic theology is. All I know is that I grew up in an environment where people were studying a lot. Right? My mom is an RN. She's a registered nurse. And so I grew up in that environment of people studying, people being very smart, and a lot of books and moving around a lot, preaching, going to church every Sabbath, staying at church all day, adventures, pathfinders, the works. Let's just call it the works, all right? We moved I was born in D.C., moved to New Jersey, then we moved to Canada, lived in Toronto, lived in another city called Oshawa, and then we moved back to Brazil. My dad went back to being a pastor in Brazil. Later on, he moved over to being a theology professor. He had been that before, and then he went back to it, and he was the dean of the theology course in Brazil, and so that's just my background, growing up and going to church, being a PK, and that's just what it was. The problem with that, in my experience, is that when you become a teenager, and I think that maybe a few of you can relate to this, you start not seeing the world anymore as your parents saw it, or your parents give it to you. Can anyone relate to that? You start not seeing the world only as what your parents relayed, but you start seeing it in your own eyes. Can you guys relate to that? I think everyone can, right? There's a moment that you kind of transition from this is the world my parents have, and this is the world that I now perceive of myself. And coupled with that is I have a very strong personality. I think I followed my dad in that, my dad has Syrian blood. My grandfather ran away from Syria, I think it's to escape the First World War, or something like that. And so, you can see it in me, in my complexion. It's just who I am, and I have a very explosive personality, and so does my dad, and we started fighting a lot. And since my parents represented religion in my life, what do you think that I started fighting against? Religion, right? Now, the problem with that, again, with that fight against religion, is that in my case, in my household, every time I asked a question, I didn't have the typical, it's because the Bible says so, it's because I'm telling you so. I didn't have that kind of answer. I had deep theological answers, right? So, why do we go to church on Sabbath? Well, and then you have the whole, explanation. Why is this when you die? Why is this, what about predestination? If God knows what I'm going to do tomorrow, am I not, predestined to do it? And then I had a whole explanation to that. So I never got the short answers. I got the long answers. So it made resisting and refuting religion kind of hard, especially for like a 12, 13-year-old kid. By that time, we had moved to Brazil. So I'm jumping over a few parts of the story, but by that time, we had moved to Brazil. I was 12. I think that the fact that we had to move around a lot, it played a big part in my life. But there we were stationary for quite a few years, and we were in a huge university, one of the biggest Adventist universities in the world, and close to, it's out in the farm area. It's a very rural area, but it's not that far from one of the second biggest city in the state of São Paulo. So if you've heard of Brazil, you've probably heard of São Paulo, right? São Paulo is one of the biggest cities in the world. I think that in the greater metropolitan area, it's over like 20 million people. So it's huge, right? And then the second biggest city in that state, so you have the state of São Paulo and you have the city of São Paulo. And so in the state of São Paulo, I believe the second biggest city is a city called Campinas. And Campinas was like 30, 40 minutes away. It's just a quick bus ride away. And so when I'm trying to refute, religion, at this point I had given up on refuting Christianity with my parents, and I wanted to find my own way, my own truth. Have you ever heard anyone say that? That they need to find their truth? Have you heard that around? That's been thrown around a lot, So I was on that boat. I was on that train. I got to find my truth, not my parents' truth. I got to find mine, my very own. And so me and a few friends, and myself, we would hop on these buses and we would go to the city for many reasons. First of all, we like going to the lawn houses. Does anyone here remember a lawn house, a LAN house? I don't know if that's what they call it in the States, but it's basically like the computer gaming houses that kids go to. They, at that time, the games were Counter-Strike. We had the precursor of League of Legends, which was Dota, so maybe a few of you can relate to that, right? So we used to run off to the city to play on these gaming houses, and I'd stay there the whole day. But in this search for religion, I started going to many religious institutions, religious places. I remember going to Mormon churches, and I remember going to Buddhist temples, Hindu temples, and I'm growing up there, and my friends are interested in that kind of stuff, and we're all Adventist kids, all right? We have no idea what we're getting ourselves into. But we're curious, we think that we're cool, and that we're just being rebellious, and all that stuff. At that time, I remember that a big wave was also reading a lot of manga. So anime books, the Japanese comics, so we read most of the classics I've read because that's from my period of adolescence. So that was a big thing, and, so we were going in that, and I remember that I couldn't just tell my parents this. I couldn't tell them that, I'm tired of being a Christian, I want to find something else. They'd flip, right? I don't know what the reaction would be, and I don't know how extreme inside myself. Sometimes we're a walking metamorphosis, right? We don't know. We're walking transformation, and I think that's all of us. Inside of you right now, there's this aspect. You're here for a reason. You're here for a reason, right? Maybe you're dragged here. Maybe you just came with friends. Maybe your parents expected you to. Maybe you came because you wanted to, you truly wanted to. So inside of us, and maybe it's all of the above, kind of combined. You say something to your friends, you say another thing to your parents, you know that the truth is another thing. That's just the reality. Humans wear masks. Can you guys relate to that? Humans wear masks. It's true. And so at that point, I didn't know how to break it to my parents, and I found out a way. You see, I had one friend that did Kung Fu. So, hearing Pastor Daniel talk about learning about martial arts, that I can relate to that because I had this friend, and he was younger than I. He was like, at this point, I don't know, 12. I was 13 or 14, and so he did, I think I was 13. He did Kung Fu, and I was like, well, Kung Fu, there's Buddhism in that. There's like Eastern religions and philosophies. I want to get in on that. So I came up to my parents, and I said, I want to do a martial art. I want to do Kung Fu with my friend. His name was also Luccas, by the way. And so they said, well, all right. His family's going. His mom was my mom's really good friend. And so I start doing Kung Fu. But to my chagrin, the Sifu, the master that teach you in Kung Fu, you call that the Shifu. Have you guys ever watched Kung Fu Panda? Sifu? No? Okay, that's fine. You don't have to. I'm not telling you that you have to. None of this, by the way, I'm not suggesting you go through this stuff, right? I don't think that you have to go through a whole bunch of stuff to find Jesus. This is my journey, and I would honestly, looking back, maybe it would be preferable if I hadn't gone through all this stuff, if I had just stuck to it, you know? In any case, the Shifu, the master, he was an Adventist. So I was like, well, you know, that just defeated the whole purpose. But I ended up liking Kung Fu. I was Northern Shaolin Kung Fu, and I stuck to that for, you know, to this day. I got a black belt in Kung Fu. I started fighting semi-professionally. I'd go to championships. I'd fight. My mom didn't like going because she saw me getting beat up sometimes, and, you know, not fun for a mom. Fun for me, right? Not for her. But that was just, you know, it did play a role in this later on, but that was me growing up. I remember going to these places. I used to get their literature. I'd read the books. I remember this one time going to the Church of Christian Science. It's different from Scientology. It's another church. I got their book, their Bible, and it's kind of intertwined, kind of mystical, and, you know, the Bible itself. And I remember reading that. And the thing is that I would go, you know, to all these major religious groups. So the scientific religions, evolution, the Church of Christian Science, and there are a few others. The mystical religions, or the, you know, the more Zen religions. So Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism. Brazil is a very spiritualistic country, and what that means is that since Brazil was colonized by, KD explained it a little bit yesterday, Brazil is a very Catholic country. It was colonized by the Catholic Church, whereas in North America, North American colonization was Protestant, right? It was Christian. South America was Catholic. So when they brought the slaves to South America, same thing that happened here in North America happened in South America. When they brought the slaves to South America, because it was a Catholic colonization, they were forcing them to become Catholic. And if they didn't, not only those that were being brought from Africa, but the natives, right? They were doing this to the natives as well. So either they would be baptized and become at least nominal Catholics, or they'd be killed, right? That's basically the story of it. So for them to survive, they would say that they were Catholic, that they were converted, but they would bring in the African religion, animism, right? They would bring in animism. And so the mixture of that is that in Brazil to this day, you have a lot of very, the best way to describe it, I think, in English is voodooistic religions. It's a lot of voodoo, right? In South America, it's called candomblé, macumba. So if there are any Brazilians out there, you know what I'm talking about. But I remember going, you know, being curious about that because that's the farthest you can get away, right? That's the farthest from where I was coming from. That's the one that my friends would be the most, whoa, you went there, you did that, you know? And a lot of this was also trying to seek attention, I guess, you know? And I've come to terms with that, but I was, you know, I was kind of like a fake. I wanted to find attention. But I remember this one point when I go to one of the centers of it, but for you to walk into it, for you to actually go in, you have to go through this gatehouse. And this gatehouse is manned by this possessed person. Like, straight up, there's no other way to put it. He's possessed by a spirit, and it's the gatehouse spirit, right? He's called Eshu. That's the name of that spirit, of that demon that we understand as a demon, right? And so you have to ask permission to him to go in. And coming from where I was coming from, I kind of knew what that meant. You know, you're kind of giving up your own rights to go into enemy, or again, in our terms, in their terms, they won't say it as enemy territory. It's his territory, right? But I chickened out at that point. I did not do that. I turned around, I went back because I got scared. Because up to that point, everything was very theoretical, right? I mean, evolution, Buddhism, Hinduism, all these isms, you're hearing mantras and virtues and all these things, but when you actually have to ask someone that himself says is channeling a spirit, if you're giving up your rights to go into his domain, that's scary because you're not in control anymore. So I chickened out. I have a friend that unfortunately he didn't. He went in different moments, but he went and he's still in that today. But what I want to tell you all is that throughout this journey, it was a journey of about 5 years, right? From the moment I was about 12 or 13 to when I was about 18. I wanted to find truth because I'll tell you something. In my mind, if you're not living with purpose, why are you living? That was me in that moment, is, well, what's the point of being alive? It's not a matter of depression, of suicide, or anything like that. That wasn't that case. It's just, why are we alive? We're this second in the history of the universe. We're nothing. We're going to live 80 years at tops, maybe 90 if you're lucky. And even then, you're lucky if you have a good quality of life. So what's the point? What are you doing? What do you want, money? Houses? Cars? What are we living for, right? So now I believe I have a little bit more answers than I had back then, but back then I didn't have any answers. I only had questions. I didn't know where to find answers. I was angry a lot of the times because I remember crying a lot. That's how I would, my anger would seep out. My parents would see me crying. They didn't know what was up. They would come in, they would pray with me but in all of these religions, I'll tell you, I promise you, at least in my experience, I didn't find answers. I just found more questions. I remember that I was doing this workshop I was already a black belt in Kung Fu, and I was doing a workshop. You see, in my case, I did Kung Fu, the traditional Kung Fu, which is, they call them the forms, right? So you do a whole bunch of forms, and my wife calls them little dances, right? She makes fun of me. So when you do the little dances, I got the black belt in that, and then after I moved over to modern fighting. And that's where I used to go to championships and fight. They call it Sanda Sanshou. It's a form of mixed martial arts. And so I used to do workshops, and I used to train with the Brazilian official Olympic team. I wasn't on the team because I was still underage, but I used to train with them of Sanshou, right, of that martial art. And so we would do different workshops with different masters, with different teachers or shifus. And I remember this one time doing this workshop with one of the highest in the world. This 80-year-old old dude. And he was Buddhist, right? Straight up, born in China, all that. And I was curious, because that's what I wanted, right? So I come up to him and I say, I have all these questions. But the thing is that everything that he would answer, the only thing that he would say is, you're asking too many questions. You have to become one. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Become one. And that's that. It's just become one, become one, become one. And I had recently read the book about the first Buddha. The guy's name is Siddhartha Gautama. That was the first Buddha. There's a bunch of Buddhas, by the way. I don't know if you guys know that. But there's a bunch of them. The first one was called Siddhartha Gautama. And you read the book, he had a pretty interesting life. Honestly, it was an interesting book to read. But I had a really big question regarding their reincarnation, the aspects of their reincarnation, because according to Buddhist reincarnation, from what I understood, over time, people, they progress more than they digress. They digress, right? So there's a progression of souls. You're reincarnated into a better existence, into a better existence, into a better existence, until finally you become one with the universe. You transcend into nirvana, right? And so, of course, there's the other way around where you digress and you become, less and less. But over time, the progression is that mostly people are progressing. And so my question is, if that's happening, where are the extra souls coming from? Because if we had, again, and this has to do with the demographic growth. So if you had like 1 million people in this year and then 1 billion people and then 7 billion years, where are these extras? Who's creating the souls? Right? Where are they coming from? Aren't most of them becoming one? Aren't they most of them moving on? And so I remember asking that question, which was a big question, and he says, too many questions. You have to become one. And I got a little bit angry at that point, right, with that. And then, again, these are just examples. What I'm trying to tell you is that with each one of these religions, and I'm a very curious person. I'll ask a bunch of questions. I don't care. I'll ask questions. So I was asking all these questions with evolution, with Hinduism. Hinduism, it's this belief. Again, and I'm ridiculously shortening the stories, but there are more than 33 million gods. Because basically everyone, when you die and you live a good life, you become a god. There's a Disney movie, it's Mulan, and in this movie, she goes into this little temple, and they're the little household gods. If you've ever watched that, you'll know what I'm talking about. And that's basically it. It's the ancestors that become the guardian spirits of the household. And of course, you have the bigger gods, the greater gods. But my question there was, look, I know myself. I'm going to become a god? That can't be. Because I know myself, right? I'm not a god. And that's a big problem with humanism, with Satanism. I got to the depths. I remember reading the Satanic Bible. There's two main ones, two main streams of it. And in it, and again, seeking attention. I was trying to find attention. I thought I was going to find this big, deep thing. In reality, I was a bit disappointed because when you read the Christian Bible, it's so nuanced. It's so deep. It's so complex. There's so many details and layers to it. And in all these other things that I'm looking for and I'm looking at, it's not that complicated. It's not that nuanced. It's very disappointing. And in the climax of the Satanic Bible, according to Anton LaVey, was, the 9 satanic rules. You know how they have the 10 Commandments of the Bible? They have the 9 satanic commandments. And basically they're contraceptions, they're contrary of the 10 commandments that God gave us. And so I was reading that, I'm like, that's it? That's all of it? There isn't more, there isn't a depth, there isn't an explanation why we're here, what we're doing here. You see, guys, every religion, wherever you go in the world and you see these 3 things, it's going to be a religion, okay? So, whatever philosophy or whatever religion that tries to tell you where you came from, what you're doing here, and where you're going, that is a religion. It's a description of your origin, your purpose, and your destination. That's a religion. Now, some religions, they explain one over the other. They emphasize one more than the other. Buddhism, for example, won't give you origin that much. You have these fantastical stories, but it's not that, it's just what it'll focus on is the destination. And then you have first and foremost destination, second, is the purpose, and third and lastly, the origin. When it comes to the Bible, it'll give you all 3, a lot of all 3. So throughout this whole journey, I was looking for answers, but I came out with only more questions. I did not find what I was looking for. And all the while, with my friends, and we're doing all these things, and I'm playing Counter-Strike, and I'm playing Call of Duty, and I'm, reading these mangas, and I'm trying to find even truth in these things, right? Because you'll look for truth, you'll look for purpose in philosophies and in concepts and ideas. If you don't find it, you'll look for it in pleasure, right? In hedonism, which is the philosophy, the pursuit of pleasure. You know what's funny is that the word hedonism, the word etymologically, which is the root of the word, it means to become numb. So that when I found that out, it was like, wow, I'm looking for pleasure, but I need more and more pleasure to provide the same amount of feeling, right? But I was looking for it there and in gaming and, up to this. I remember waking up in high school, and not waking up, just pretending to fall asleep and then going to the computer that was downstairs, because at that time it was dial-up, right? You didn't have Wi-Fi or anything like that. You had to use the phone line to be on the internet, and I'd wake up at midnight, and then hidden from my parents, I'd go downstairs and play my online game all night, go to school, and sleep at school. So that's what I used to do, right? And so in vacation, my mom used to work in the States for 2 weeks out of every month or every other month or something. And, my dad, a pastor, he was working a lot. So during vacation, I'd be on the computer for every waking moment, 16 hours a day. So growing up, and I was a preacher's kid, and I was looking for truth, and I was doing kung fu, and I was playing these games, and I was reading manga, and my life was just this chaos. And, my friends knew about it, but they were going through the same thing. And then finally, I'm 18 years old, and I have to choose what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I think it's an unfair thing to ask kids to know what they're going to do for the rest of their life at 18, right? At 17 or whatever. It's even more unfair when you ask a kid that's 12 years old, what are you going to be when you grow up? And they'll give you an answer. I want to do this. Well, how do you know? I only figured that out recently that I wanted to stay as a pastor, right? So in any case, I'm 18 years old, and I have to figure something out. And in my mind, I'm worried because I know that life is passing. I'm a very sentimental person. I'll cry very easily about a lot of stuff. So I know that life is passing by, and what's the purpose? What's the point? What am I living for? It's apparently nothing, and I'm doing all this stuff, and there's no point. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to study theology, as you do, right? When you're all lost, you go and study theology. So that's what I decided to do. I went to study theology because I wanted to be saved. That was my reasoning. It's not because I wanted to be a pastor. Honestly, if you had told me that I was going to turn out a pastor, I'd have laughed at you. I'm going to be talking in public. This would be terrifying, by the way. Just praying in front of 3 or 4 people at that time, I used to tremble. I was embarrassed. I couldn't do it. I remember I was in Pathfinders, and they asked me to preach a little 10-minute sermonette. It was terrible. I was terrified of it. My first sermon, I was 21 years old or something, or 20 years old. We were in my mom's home state, and I went to preach one of my dad's sermons about Lot's wife. And this is after my conversion. We'll get to that. But just to give you an idea of how ashamed I was of public speaking, I like that KD said yesterday that some people are more scared of it than dying. Public speaking is the number one fear. Well, I love that because I was terrified of it. So it explains a lot. I went up to preach. I had prepared a 40-minute sermon. I preached it in 5 minutes, right? My dad had to come up. He did a little joke, and he finished the sermon for me. So I was, ashamed, embarrassed, and it was that whole thing. And I said, God, forget it. I'm not becoming a pastor. How's that going to work out? I can't talk in public. Now I just can't stop talking. I have to run because my time is short. But so by the time I'm 18 years old, I'm going to study theology. I want to be saved. I decided to give the Bible, the Christian Bible, a second chance. Because honestly, I don't think I gave it a first good chance. And let me tell you a very important truth. God does not have grandchildren. God does not have grandchildren. I asked the question, how many of you were born Adventist? A bunch of you lifted up your hands. That works, all right? You can be born in an institution, in a religion, and because of your parents. You're not born knowing Jesus. You're not. It doesn't work that way. Knowing someone, having a religion, it's something that's built. It's constructed, right? One of the questions that I used to really dislike growing up was, who here loves Jesus? You know when they ask little kids, who loves Jesus? And all the kids, yay, I love Jesus. I didn't, as a kid, I used to question that. I used to be like, I'd be there putting my hands up because everyone was doing it. But in my mind, I was like, well, I don't think I know him that well. So that was a very big reality for me. That's why today, there's some here that are in my baptismal class. I see a Tanner and Chase, you guys are right there. I try to go all in. I try to give answers because I don't want kids later on saying, well, you know what? When I was baptized, I just did it because of my friends and I didn't really know what I was getting in. So those that do baptismal classes with me, there's no excuse. It's on you. If you don't know it, that's on you. That's not on me because I try. Because I think that you got to know what you're getting yourself into. But I decided to study theology because I wanted to know Jesus. I wanted to be saved. I studied theology for 2 years, and I'll be honest with you guys, I did find answers. The Bible, when you study the Christian Bible, there is no way for you to cast it aside, for you to say that this is just made up, that this was just, invented, it's a fake, it's a fairy tales. There's no way. Historically, the Christian Bible is the most studied scripture or source of literature on the planet. There are libraries about this book. Right? Nothing else is studied more than the Christian Bible. Nothing. I promise you this, as a pastor, I can tell you professionally, nothing has been studied in the history of earth more than the Christian Bible. So the more you get into it, the more you start learning about it, the historical elements and the archaeological elements and the sociological, anthropological, nuances of the Bible, you cannot cast it aside. You just can't. So that happened to me. I was just like, I was convinced this is true. This thing is true. Out of everything else that I've been to, everyone else that I've talked to, every other place that I've gone to, all the other books that I've read, the movies that I've watched, all of the things, the documentaries, this thing makes more sense than everything else. This is more plausible than everything else. But here's the problem. While in every other religion, you can participate and truly be part of it just by the teachings of it, you can't do that in Christianity. You can be Buddhist without Buddha. You could be Islamic without Muhammad. You can be Confucius without Confucius. You can be confused too. But you cannot be a Christian without Jesus Christ. And while I was convinced that this was true, I wasn't converted. Because my life up to that point, in those 5 years of, adolescence, of being a teenager, it reflected the truth of Psalm 139, verse 7, that says this. It says, "Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, and your right hand shall hold me, if I say, surely the darkness shall fall on me, even the night shall be a light to me. Indeed, the darkness shall not hide from you." Up to that moment, I was fleeing. Because of anger, because of friends, because of what I had grown used to, I was running away. So whereas Pastor Daniel was fighting, I was in a flight. I was running away. And I ran away to a bunch of different places. In my mind and in philosophies and whatever, I was running away. And this text, it broke me. I mean, I had read it before, but when I was there, I remember reading this in my second year of theology, and I was like, well, I can't run away. I've been trying, I've even tried theology and church and the Bible and all the stuff that people say, but I haven't found it. I can't run away from this. And so I decided to try to run away again. At that time, another movie had come out, which was X-Men Origins. Don't watch it. But it's about the story of this guy that it starts with him up in the mountains, and he's a lumberjack, and he just ran away, from the world and from life and all. And I'm like, I can get on board on that train. I want to become a lumberjack in Alaska. And that's what I decided to do. I was already like 20 years old. I was in the second year of theology. I was like, well, this isn't going to save me. It convinced me, but it's not going to save me. And so I decided that I wanted to go to Alaska to cut lumber. I didn't know what that meant because I thought that it was just with an axe. Nowadays it's a lot more efficient than that. They have chainsaws. They have a whole bunch of machines, right? So in my mind, you know how you idealize stuff sometimes? So I'm going to go to Alaska, I'm going to live in the mountains, and I'm just snow, and I'm going to get like strong, jacked up, and all that stuff. And I always like fighting and working out and all that stuff. And so I decided to go. But then, providentially, we had a lunch at home, and one of my dad's good friends was studying his postdoctoral program in Germany. And so, my parents I started, what if I go to Germany instead? And I was weighing things. I go to Alaska, it's just cold and just snow, and there's no one there. I can't even see penguins because that's when I learned they were in the South Pole apparently only. So Alaska, cutting wood, just in the cold, not learning nothing new, and then going to Germany where, Europe, and you can travel around. There are castles. I love castles, so I want to see castles. And so I decided to go to Germany. But I still wanted to run away. I was tired of people knowing me as the pastor's son. At this point, my dad was the dean of theology in Brazil. And when people saw me studying theology, it was just, well, he's just doing it because his dad, is in it. And he's just doing it because his dad is a pastor. And they would see my dad through me. They wouldn't say, it's not my dad's fault, by the way. Poor guy. My dad's a great guy. I love my dad. My dad is the greatest example, one of the greatest examples in my life. But at that time, I wanted to be my own person. And so I decided I'm going to go to Germany, and I'm going to, no one's going to know me. There's no church people involved. I'm going to be my own person. And I went, and my dad went with me to take me he went there. He was going to leave me, come back. And we went. And for the first 3 months, I was going to stay in the city called Heidelberg. And we were staying at this church, the Adventist church, the first 2 weeks, and then I was going to move in with my dad's friend. And a week went by, and my dad was about to go back to Brazil. And I remember the day, he was leaving, and I was like, yes, I'm going to be by myself. Now I'm independent. Now I'm going to have some money that they're leaving with me, and I can just do whatever I want, go to bed whatever time I want, just go out whenever I want. But my dad, in this church, it was 4 o'clock in the morning. He had to get like a train ride to Frankfurt where he was going to take the plane. And so he turns around. It was raining. He had an umbrella in his hand. He turns around. He looks me straight in the eye, and he says, son, he said these 3 things that at the moment didn't make much of an impact, but you'll see later on. He said, son, he looked me straight in the eye. He said, son, you have parents that love you. You have a home to come back to, and God has a plan for your life. Those 3 things. And at the moment, I said, all right, Dad, thanks. That's beautiful and stuff. And so in Germany, my dad had left. I was all by myself. I was discovering the world, and I had never, in my rebellion against whatever, I had never wanted to use drugs. That never appealed to me, or to drink alcohol, because I fought. I used to, the body, your health, that was a big thing for me, because I was an athlete. I did that. So I didn't want to ruin my body. But, and again, up to that point, I had been very careful about my purity. I didn't make out with girls. None of that stuff. I didn't hook up. I had girlfriends before, but it was very Christian, very, very controlled. And when I saw that things were getting out of hand, I would break up, and And that happened a lot. But at that point, I met this girl in Germany, and, she was very beautiful and exotic because she spoke a different language, and I was impressed. And so we started hanging out, and I fell head over heels for this girl. And yeah, that happened. That you fall head over heels over someone, and it's very easy for you to be taken along, by whatever they're saying. And this girl, my plan was to stay in the city for about 3 months and then go on to this the Adventist university in Austria called Bogenhofen. But she was trying to convince me to stay in Heidelberg. And there's this one moment that was very crucial for me, because let me tell you something. When you're by yourself is when you find out of what you're made of. Up to that point, even though I was trying to run away, I was running away within home, so I had to keep up appearances. I was by myself here. I didn't have to impress anyone. I didn't have to, keep up appearances anymore. So I stopped going to church. I wasn't reading the Bible. I wasn't even praying that much anymore. And I felt it. I felt that there was something weird. Because let me tell you something. You think it's easy for you to abandon your if you're born an Adventist Christian, you think it's easy for you to abandon it? It's not. Because God will fight for you. The Holy Spirit will fight for you. And so I'm in this moment of being, pulled and tugged on, and I know that God is fighting for me. I know, at least in hindsight, I know it. And then there's this one moment where the girl, she invites me to go to a birthday party with her. And in my innocent Adventist, created Adventist upbringing, a birthday party is, it's like pointy hats and it's cake and it's, happy birthday to you, and it's, it's very innocent. And when I got there, it was a full-out party with just music banging all around me. I couldn't hear myself talk, literally. I couldn't hear myself talk. And, drinks were alcoholic drinks were free for women that night. They do that sometimes, apparently. And so I found that very unfair. But I didn't want to drink anyway, so it was okay for me. But, so this girl, I didn't drink, but because, again, it had nothing to do with religion at that point. It had to do with me trying to conserve my health. And so she was drinking, and she was already a little bit tipsy, I guess. And I was there looking around me, and I was judging. I was there, but I was judging people. Look at all these people. They're going to hell, I was there. I was right there with them. And at one point, she goes to the bathroom, and again, I remember this guy throwing a glass down, and she comes back, and Uncle Tony asked me to not hold anything back. This is a moment where I won't be crass, all right? So those who understand will understand. Those who won't, ask your parents later. She made me a very indecent proposal. That's how I'll put it. She made me an indecent proposal. And at the moment of that proposal, and she did it with a represent, it was an indecent proposal, all right? And at the moment, nothing like that had been offered to me that easily. And it struck me. This is it. This is where I make a choice. Because again, to that moment, I had broken the Sabbath before. I'm not going to lie. Growing up, I'd play, whatever. We played Age of Empires on the computer and just say it was the Israelites. Right? That was me growing up. Yeah. We'd play cops and robbers on Sabbath, and it's just Israelites and Philistines. So I had broken the Sabbath before. But I had never. This was big. Casting away my virginity. That was big. You don't come back from that. When people make fun of you because you're a virgin, and they'll do that, say, look, I could be like you in a second. You can't be like me ever again. And I knew that. And so that was big. And I won't lie, I almost went. No one would know. She was gorgeous. It would be good. I was miles away from home. But then, at that moment, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, in that party, halfway across the world from home, my dad's words come kicking back, just flying back. Your parents love you. You have a home to come back to. God has a plan for your life. And that just kept hammering and hammering and hammering on my mind. And I couldn't. Something broke in me. And it might look, to a lot of people that have lived in the world, this is nothing. That's ridiculous. It's nothing. But to an Adventist kid, this was huge. This was monumental. And something inside of me broke. It just broke. I made up some excuse to the girl. I left her alone there. I mean, she'd get back to her house just fine. I just left her there, and I ran. Now, I was discussing this with my wife this morning, and she said, don't exaggerate the numbers. And I don't know how far it was, all right? In my mind, it was like 100 miles, all right? But it must have been, from our calculations, maybe like 5 or 6 miles away. I ran the whole way back. I ran, and I was crying. Imagine seeing this like 20-year-old guy running at all speed, full speed, somewhere, and just bawling, just crying, right? And that was me. I got back to the apartment, and I broke down in tears, and I remember that's where I felt Jesus. That's where I felt myself meet Jesus. And I don't know why, I cried the rest of that night. I had never read The Great Controversy, the book. That's a book that the devil does not want you to read. I read that book from cover to cover. I had never done that before, from cover to cover in 2 days. All right, I didn't sleep, I didn't go to school, I didn't do anything. I just, I'd go to the bathroom, I'd go back to bed, and I'd be reading. That's how I met Jesus. 20 years old, second year of theology, grown up as an Adventist kid. That is where, and let me tell you, it's not that I found Jesus. Jesus found me. Jesus isn't lost. I was lost. Jesus found me. Now, I don't have the time to tell you what happened after that, all right? Because after that, how I actually became a pastor, that's a whole other story, all right? And that's a good story that I can tell you in another moment, and maybe next year or something like that. But at that moment, I decided that I would shape up. I would finish my time in Germany, learn German. Life is short for you to learn German, by the way. But I tried my best. I came back, finished theology, and here I am 10, 12 years later as a pastor. Now, I do want to tell you a few things. First of all, you cannot run away from God. You can try, but he will fight for you. The way down, the path down, it's a difficult road, because you'll have to deal with the Holy Spirit blaring the voice of salvation in your ears. You'll have to overstep the crucified body of Jesus that was crucified for you. You'll have to defy and deny everything you've learned before. It's a hard path, and thank God it's a hard path. But I do want to tell you 3 things that I get from this story today. First of all, in that moment of my teenager years, my life had no master. Well, let me fix that. The master of my life was not God. The master of my life at that point was myself and whatever else I was looking for. At times it was a game, at times it was a manga, at times it was a band, at times it was, me looking for, it was my books. I didn't have a master or a fixed master. The first step in life, if you want to succeed, the first step, you know what it is? Define your master. Who is your master? And there are a bunch of masters out there. God has a lot of rivals. God has a lot of rivals, but they don't live up to him. The first thing is define your master. Who is the master of your life? Is it success? Is it money? Is it education? Is it school? Is it academic work? Is it a relationship? Is it family? Who is the master? What is the master? And you'll see out in the world a lot of people with a lot of different masters. It took me 2 decades to truly figure out the master of my life. But when I found him, when I met him, all right, not heard about him, because you can be convinced about Christ without being converted to Christ. So when you meet him, when he becomes the master of your life, he will give you something that I also didn't have until I had the master. You know what it is? The mission. Once you have a master, he will give you a mission. So, you know those feelings that I described of feeling no purpose? What's the point? I didn't have it because I didn't have a master. How could I have a purpose without having a master? So if you feel that you have a purpose in your life, but you also feel that you don't know Jesus yet, my question is, who's your master? Who gave you that purpose? Who gave you that mission? In my case, it was Jesus. Jesus was the master. God is the master, and he gave me a purpose. I decided to become a pastor. And God will give a purpose, different purposes to different people. The third thing, the third M, I call them the 3 M's. So what's the first one? Master. The second? Mission. The third is one that I learned there with that girl, matrimony. The person you end up with, that person represents you. That person has a lot about your personality. That person will define a lot of your life. Be extremely careful with who you end up with. Life can be heaven on earth if you're married to the right person. Life can be hell on earth if you're married to the wrong person. Trust me, right? Trust me because I know the heaven on earth part, but as a pastor, I've seen the hell on earth part. Be extremely careful. Master, mission, matrimony. Don't invert those orders, all right? If you can, don't invert those orders. It is the master first, mission second, matrimony third. And I want to end right now, in these last 3 minutes, I want to end with a verse, all right, that made sense of all these things to me. This is Ecclesiastes chapter 12. This is a very famous verse in the Bible. It says, "Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them." Can you guys repeat this with me? Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Repeat it. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. Again. Now, this is a book that is all about, there's a time for everything, right? Ecclesiastes, remember Ecclesiastes 3? There's a time to die, to be born. There's a time for this, a time for that. Why do you think that at the end of the book he says that the time for you to remember God is in the days of your youth? Why? Wouldn't it make more sense if it's at the end of your life, when things already make more sense and you're wiser and smarter? Why is he saying remember your Creator in the days of your youth, at your age right now? You know why? Because this is the moment when you make the biggest decisions that you're ever going to make. This is the moment. Now you define, and it's not only that. It's not only that this moment you make the biggest decisions, it's because you make the biggest decisions with the smallest consequences. If you right now decide that God is your master, that's good because you have the rest of your life. If you decide, well, right now the master, if it just happens, the master is I want to make money. But then when you're 25, you decide that you want to start over again and now you're going to dedicate your life to God, you kind of lost those years. So right now, you are at the beginning of it all. You can make the biggest decisions, the best decisions, and you can have the rest of your life to live for this, to figure it out, to find it out. How many people here of the older folks that I know wouldn't give their right arm to go back to when they were your age and know what they know now? I know that, I might if I could go back. So now is the time. Master, mission, matrimony. Choose the right master. He will give you the right mission, and I promise you, he'll take care of the rest. All right? That's what I wanted to share with you all. Again, this was not a sermon. All right? This was not a sermon. This was more just me telling my story. I hope that it in one way or another, you can relate to it. I hope that it proves to be helpful at one moment. If you guys want to talk, I'll be around. I would like to finish with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for being the God that leads life. Thank you so much for giving us, Lord, the opportunity of loving you, praising you, and getting to know you more. Lord, right here, there are probably a lot of young people that are facing difficult questions. Life is made of questions. Questions are the stuff of life. And Lord, I know that sometimes you don't answer these questions in our time or the way that we want it. I just ask you to please provide the answers to these young people in the way that will give them a sense of life. Allow them, Lord, to meet you as the master. Please give them the purpose, the mission, and all the rest, Lord, matrimony and everything else. Please fill that out in its right time. I ask you these things in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless.